Here's Guy Wayman, Ben Brunson, and Frank Vernuccio inside the news.
Well, welcome back to our next segment. This is our international segment of Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio inside the news. Okay, Ben, we've got the Iran recertification that has just happened. Kind of explain what's going on here, Ben.
Well, under the deal we entered into with Iran under the Obama administration, there are periodic certifications that are required out of the White House. And the White House today certified that Iran is complying with their end of the deal. This is obviously it came after much internal debate within the White House. There is a desire by the Trump administration to take on Iran very forcefully. The problem that the administration has is that they have been dealt a very poor hand. The fact of the matter is that Iran is complying with the deal because the deal was so favorable to them. For instance, our ability to inspect Iranian facilities under the deal was virtually wiped out. We had a UN brokered inspection regime that was reasonably robust, that existed for many years prior to signing this deal. Under the deal that Obama agreed to, essentially the UN has pulled out of Iran because for us to go to inspect any facility such as Natanz or Fordo, where the Iranians enrich uranium, we have to make a request into them. It is an involved process. The Iranians can reject our request. There's a lengthy process, all of which means that the Iranians only effectively have to agree to let us see something that they know is uncontroversial. So the Iranian ability to cheat is pretty manifest at this point. Everything in the deal was favorable for Iran. They made the decision to set back their uranium enrichment by a couple of years in return for lifting the economic sanctions on Iran. They've had a multi-billion-dollar windfall. We released over $100 billion in cash to the Iranians that was being held in Western banks under the prior sanctions regime. And most importantly is all of the sanctions that had been honored by Western companies that was keeping technology out of Iran, technology they need to advance their ballistic missile program and their nuclear program. All of that has ended. And what happened as soon as the deal was signed is that a bunch of eager Western companies, a lot of German companies and French companies, but a whole lot of big German companies were eager to rush into Iran to sell them the latest technology, the types of things they need to advance their programs and their desires. So it was a big win. They paid a relatively small price. They gave up some enriched uranium, but they can replace that fairly quickly. In return, they are going to be completely free in just a few short years to legally purchase anything that advances their ballistic missile program on the global marketplace. So the Iranians are complying because it's a good deal for them. The Trump administration, just as we talked about with healthcare, is going to have to decide the course they want to take, what is possible now to stop the Iranians from going nuclear and from developing nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles in conjunction with their allies, the North Koreans. It is a very difficult proposition. It is almost impossible to put the sanctions back in place in a way that Western European companies will participate the way they were prior to this deal. So we are way behind the eight ball at this point. I think personally, just like with Korea, we've essentially, because of this deal, ensured that the only way to stop Iran from going nuclear with a very robust ballistic missile capability is the use of military force. And it's something that if Trump is reelected, he will almost certainly face that decision during his tenure in office.
All right. Well, one thing that Trump has going for him that Americans probably like is that they don't have people in the White House kind of pushing for a pro-Iranian policy. And I'm referring to Valerie Jarrett and Uma Abedin, who have been there, and I know I've been beating this dead horse, but I'm telling you, I think that these two gals, they have been behind the scenes pushing, and Barack Obama was fully on board with letting Iran have its way. Frank?
Well, I think that's absolutely true. You know, presidents don't necessarily have to agree with public opinion polls or even with Congress on their foreign policy. However, what they do have to do, what they do owe to the American people, is at least an outline of what their foreign policy goals are. That's something we failed to see throughout the 8 years of the Obama administration. And, Guy, just as you point out, clearly the goals of the Obama administration had more to do with what was good for Iran than what was good for the United States or any of our allies. But the Obama administration never had the honesty to say that out loud, never had the honesty to come forward with it. The transfer of cash and pallets of cash to Iran following the signing of the deal, absolutely unprecedented in American diplomatic history, particularly since we know that some of that cash was going to go to Hezbollah and terrorist groups supported by Iran. The fact is the Obama administration ran a rogue foreign policy with goals that were never announced and that were clearly antithetical to American interest.
Well, let's pick up on that before we go back to Ben. I think you're absolutely right, and I think that was part, when you said a rogue foreign policy, when you said that, deep state came to my mind, and I think right then Obama was planning this other government underneath the original United States government. Frank?
Well, clearly, if we take a look at the appointments that President Obama made, it certainly had no interest with the rest of the American people. There was a response to an article I had written which criticized appointed officials, holdovers from the Obama administration, doing everything they can to destroy the Trump agenda. And one person who wrote into the newspaper said, "How dare the President of the United States upset professional bureaucrats who know what's good for the country?" And it struck me that we've turned our entire concept of democracy on its head. The fact that an unelected bureaucracy is seen by at least some on the left as being the real government, when the voice of the people carried out in general elections is seen as an intrusion into the rights of bureaucrats. Where have we gone as a country?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now let's stay overseas a little bit here. And Ben, you brought up the rioting and the sexual assaults in Germany. Your comments on that?
Well, another weekend of festivals and another example of the cost being imposed on Europe by unfettered immigration from the Middle East and from North Africa. There was a German folk festival in Schorndorf outside of Stuttgart. And if you've been to Germany, and I lived in Germany briefly in my youth, I speak a little German, so I'm very familiar with the country. There are lots of festivals that take place around Germany. It is a cultural tradition that the Germans partake of, especially in the spring and summertime. And in this latest festival, as we have seen in many times throughout Germany and the rest of Europe, we saw a huge number of sexual assaults take place in this festival, and the festival ended with a night of rioting by up to 1,000 young people, most of whom were migrants, rioting in this small little picturesque village of Schorndorf. So this is, again, the impact on Europe of migration, of people who are not assimilating in any way, shape, or form. The migrants that are coming are overwhelmingly young and overwhelmingly male, and in fact are disproportionately combat-aged males. So you have a lot of unemployed males who are Muslims living on the dole throughout Europe, and they just get angrier, and they have no ability to assimilate. They have very limited or no job prospects. So you can guess which way this is going to go, and it is, in fact, going in that direction.
The Haiti Clinton review, we're going to put that in Section 3 because we're going to deal more with Clinton. But, Frank, let's bring in the House passes the NDAA. Explain what that is and its ramifications.
The NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act, and it simply provides the funds that the Pentagon needs to keep the country safe from foreign attack. During the Obama years, the defense budget was slashed to the bone, and to make it worse, Congress and the White House agreed to a sequester which cut all government funding basically by equal measures. It would be as though if you have your family budget and you were worried about spending too much, you decided that cutting out going on a luxury vacation should be cut by about the same amount as you cut your mortgage. Now, obviously, that makes no sense whatsoever, but that's what did occur under the sequester. Now, President Trump, fulfilling a campaign promise, did provide a defense budget request, which was about $54 billion over the last Obama budget. The problem is, after years of being starved for funding, that was sharply inadequate. And so the House put up a request of, I think it was $686.6 billion, which was about $19 billion, I believe, over the Trump budget. The Senate wants to add even more to that in order to make up for the deficits during the Obama years. Now, to show you how seriously bad our defense situation is, Mac Thornberry, who is the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, said that in reviewing the status of today's military, without even talking about big, expensive new buys like the F-35 or anything else, we're in a situation where, according to Thornberry, we have planes that cannot fly, ships that cannot sail, soldiers who cannot deploy, and we have basic things like ammunition that we simply don't have the ability to afford to give to our troops. Remember, too, that it's been about 30 years since we had a last major upgrade to our defense capability. That was during the Reagan years. We have soldiers that are flying planes that date back to the 1950s. We've got tanks that date back to the 1980s, all of which have been used and overused in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. We need to rebuild our military, particularly since our adversaries in Russia, China, North Korea, even Iran, have engaged in dramatic arms buildups over the past couple of years, which went totally unanswered by anything the United States did.
Okay, Ben, your thoughts on the NDAA?
Well, look, I think this is good news in that this is one area where Congress is very much on board with the president's vision. In fact, perhaps has exceeded it. I will note that what is passed through the House and the NDAA is significantly in excess of what the administration requested, which was a little over $600 billion. What is passed is closer to $700 billion, and in fact, it looks like the Senate is on board for at least what the House just passed. So defense spending is going up quite significantly. These are dramatic increases over where we were at with the Obama administration. However, there's a downside to this, and the fact is that we are looking at a pretty significant deficit this year. The CBO is projecting over the next decade that we'll add about $10 trillion to our current $20 trillion in federal debt, so roughly $1 trillion a year. So the fact is, when you have 80% of your budget consumed by entitlement spending, as is the case in the United States, and all of that entitlement spending, because of the aging of America, is growing in excess of the rate of growth of GDP, as is the case. We have very serious financing issues as a country. We have very little appetite to address the entitlement side of the equation. You see that happening in the Obamacare debate. That's an entitlement. And the concept of taking away that new entitlement that is only 7 years old, but the concept of taking that away is anathema to many in Congress, And a clear, strong majority of senators do not want to go that route. So our ability to reform our entitlement spending is limited. I feel good that we are rebuilding our military, funding our military. I think this is what requires a rebuild from where we're at, but it is a step in the right direction. But there is a flip side to all of this. This growth in spending is stuff that we are not paying for as we go.
All right, Frank. Just in a quick comment here that with the defense spending, though, will also come more jobs.
Well, that's exactly right. Of course, building all that equipment for the military provides middle-class jobs, and that is one good side effect. It also has to be understood that we are getting too much of our military equipment and some of the basic components like fiber optics and computer chips from overseas. In some cases, startlingly enough, we're even getting some equipment we use in our military from China, of all places. That has to stop.
All right, this is our second segment, and it's the international segment of Inside the News. You can follow us at WBV Inside the News on YouTube. Like us and subscribe to our channel and our website, itnradio.com, with Frank Vernuccio and Ben Brunson. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.